Envoy Kael had studied humans for 11 years, not casually, professionally, with the methodical rigor that his posting required and his nature demanded. Cultural briefings, behavioral analyses, interaction logs filed quarterly with the diplomatic commission. He had read every academic paper the Conclave's xenocultural division had produced on human social structure. He had attended 4 interspecies summits where humans were present and had watched them carefully across every meal, every session, every informal corridor conversation. He believed he understood them reasonably well. He had believed this until this morning. Dr. Mara Solis was sitting on the floor of the diplomatic transit lounge. Not a chair, the floor, spine against the wall, knees drawn up, both hands wrapped around a cup of something that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. She had been in this position since the news arrived. Kael had observed her from the corridor doorway for 23 minutes, waiting for the grief display to complete itself so the morning's scheduled briefings could begin. It had not completed itself. He understood clinically what she was doing. Humans displayed grief physically and publicly in ways his species reserved for immediate kin loss only. He had read the literature. He had flagged it as a cultural difference requiring professional accommodation. What he had not accounted for was the specific source of the grief. The news this morning had been about the Vethani settlement on Carris Moon. 41 children, lost in the atmospheric collapse. Vethani children, not human, not even a species with formal diplomatic relations with humanity. A small, quiet people on a small, quiet moon who had been in conflict with their neighboring system for 60 years and had never once intersected with Mara Solis's life in any documented way. Kael stepped into the doorway. Dr. Solis. She looked up, eyes red, not performing, not managing, just undone by something that had happened to people she had never met. "My apologies for the intrusion," he said carefully. "I wanted to confirm the morning briefings." She nodded once. "Give me a few minutes." He should have left. Protocol said leave. Instead, he heard himself ask, "You knew the Vethani on Carris Moon?" "No," she said. He stood very still. "Then why?" he said, not unkindly, genuinely. "Are you grieving?" The question sat between them. Mara looked at it the way you look at something that seems simple and reveals itself on examination to be the kind of question that contains everything. Because they were children, she said. Kael considered this. He was not dismissive. She could see that. He was genuinely processing it the way someone processes a sentence in a language they speak fluently but encounter in an unfamiliar construction. "The Vethani children," he said. "Yes, but they were not your children, not your species, not your diplomatic responsibility, not your genetic." "I know," she said. "Then the grief is," he paused, searching, "metaphorical." "No," she said simply. "It's real." He was quiet for a moment. Kael's species, the Orin, processed their silences differently from humans. Where human silence often meant searching for words, Orin silence meant arranging existing understanding into a new configuration. She had learned to wait through them. "In my species," he said, finally, "grief is a biological response to the loss of genetic investment. It exists to process the specific damage of losing someone whose survival was tied to your own continuity." He said it without coldness, just precision. Grief for a stranger serves no function in that framework. "I know," Mara said again. And yet, she confirmed, he stepped fully into the lounge. Not sitting, Orin didn't sit the way humans sat, but positioning himself in the specific way that meant he intended to continue the conversation. "The Vethani's neighboring system," he said. "The Dorith, the ones they've been in conflict with for 60 years. "Yes. They sent a message this morning," Kael said, before the news was even formally released. "A message of condolence." He paused. "I have been attempting to understand it for 2 hours." Mara looked at him. "You can't," she said softly. "Not from inside your framework." "Explain to me," he said. She looked at her cold cup, at the floor, at the specific middle distance of someone finding the words for something they have never needed to explain before, because it has always simply been true. "The Dorith didn't send that message because the children were Vethani," she said. They sent it because they were children. That is the same answer you gave me, he said. Yes, she said. It is. Kael stood very still. I don't understand it, he said, not frustrated, genuinely, carefully honest. I know, Mara said. Sit with me for a minute. He didn't sit. Orin physiology didn't accommodate human sitting. Their joints articulated differently. Their resting posture was a standing lean rather than a settled weight. But he moved to the wall beside her and positioned himself against it in the Orin equivalent, present, unhurried, committed to the space. It was, Mara thought, the most human thing she had seen him do in 2 years of working together. They were quiet for a moment. Outside the transit lounge, the diplomatic station continued its morning. Footsteps, distant conversations, the low hum of systems that never slept. You said your framework, she said eventually. Grief as biological function. Loss of genetic investment. Yes. Does it work, she asked. The framework. Does it help when you lose someone? He considered this with the honesty she had come to rely on from him. Kael was many things she found difficult, but he was never dishonest. It provides structure, he said. It explains the grief, contextualizes it, gives it a beginning and a projected end. But, I didn't say, but. You were about to. Another Orin silence, longer this time. But, he said, it only functions for losses the framework accounts for. Mara nodded slowly. What happens, she said carefully, to the losses it doesn't account for? He didn't answer immediately, and in that non-answer Mara heard something she recognized not from 11 years of diplomatic work, but from something older, from being human and watching other humans carry things they had no language for. Kael, she said quietly, the atmospheric collapse on Carris Moon. Yes. The Orin Trade Commission supplied environmental processing systems to the neighboring system 8 months ago, she said. I read the procurement logs last night. The silence this time was different. The systems were standard commercial grade, he said, used in dozens of applications across the Conclave. There was no reason to anticipate. I know, she said. We did nothing wrong. I know that too. He was very still. What? He said, and his voice had changed slightly. Something careful and new moving through his careful and professional composure is the word for what I have been feeling since this morning. Mara looked at him. It has a few names, she said softly, depending on what's underneath it. I don't understand what is underneath it. I know, she said. That's the hardest part. She looked at her cold cup again. The Dorith message, she said. The condolence. Did your commission respond? It was flagged for review, he said. Diplomatically ambiguous, given the ongoing conflict parameters. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. 41 children, she said quietly, and we're reviewing the parameters. What would you do? He asked. She opened her eyes. I would respond, she said, immediately, without review. Why? Because, she said, some things are more important than parameters. Some things are more important than parameters. Kael stood with that sentence the way you stand with something heavy, not putting it down. Not yet, just feeling the full weight of it before deciding where to carry it. Your species, he said, responds to grief with action. Sometimes, Mara said, when we're paying attention. The Dorith message, you would respond to it because they reached across 60 years of war to say we see your loss, Mara said, and the only correct response to that is we see yours too. Asterisk, even though their actions contributed to the conflict that, even though, she said, especially though. He was quiet for a long time. The station hummed around them. Somewhere down the corridor, 2 voices negotiated something in a language Mara didn't speak. I have been attempting, Kael said carefully, to classify what I have been experiencing since this morning, within my framework. And it doesn't fit any existing category, he said. It is not grief in the biological sense. I had no genetic connection to the Vethani on Carris Moon. It is not guilt in the legal sense. The Commission's actions were commercially legitimate, and there was no reasonable basis to anticipate consequences. He paused, and yet something is present, something that has been sitting in me since the news arrived, and will not resolve into anything my framework accounts for. Mara looked at him. I know that feeling, she said softly. What is it? Conscience, she said. Not guilt. Conscience. The awareness that you exist inside a web of consequence larger than your intentions. The word landed in the space between them. Conscience, he repeated. It doesn't mean you did something wrong, she said. It means you're paying attention. He absorbed this with the careful thoroughness she had always admired in him, the Orin quality of receiving information completely before responding to it. Does it resolve? He asked. The conscience. Does it end? No, she said honestly. But you learn to live inside it rather than trying to get out of it. That sounds, he said, profoundly uncomfortable. It is, she said. It's also the only way I know of to stay connected to what matters. His terminal chimed from his jacket pocket. He looked at it, then looked at Mara. The Dorith, he said. His voice had changed again, that careful new quality moving through it more openly now. They've made a formal request. What kind of request? To send representatives to Carris Moon, he said, to help with recovery efforts. He looked at the message again. The Vethani government received it 20 minutes ago. And they said yes, he said quietly. After 60 years, they said yes. The transit lounge was very still. That, Mara said softly, is what grief does, when you let it. 60 years. Kael kept returning to that number. 60 years of conflict, resource disputes, territorial claims, generational inherited hostility that had long outlasted its original causes. He had read the Dorith Vethani file as background context when he took this posting. He had classified it as a stable low-grade conflict, unlikely to escalate, unlikely to resolve, the kind of diplomatic fixture that simply existed in the background of the Conclave's political landscape like a slow-moving weather system. A condolence message had moved it. Not a treaty, not a negotiation, not a summit with formal delegations and prepared positions and carefully worded joint statements. Grief, extended across an enemy line, had done in one morning what 60 years of managed diplomacy had not. How often, he said, does this happen? More than the formal record shows, Mara said. Less than it should. You said humans are inconsistent at this. Deeply, she said. We get it right sometimes and completely wrong other times, and there's no reliable formula for which will happen. We extend empathy to beings we've never met and withhold it from people standing right in front of us. We grieve publicly for causes and forget quietly about people. She paused. We're not a success story. We're a species still working out how to use a capacity we were born with. But the capacity itself, Kael said, it's always present. Always, she said, even when we're ignoring it, even when we're actively working against it. She looked at her hands. It's the thing that makes us hardest to give up on, even for ourselves. He was quiet for a long time. My father, he said. Mara waited. He died 4 years ago. My framework processed it correctly, grief within the biological parameters, resolved within the projected time frame. He paused. And yet, she said softly, something remained, he said, after the framework said it should be complete. Something I have been carrying that doesn't have a name in my language. What did it feel like? She asked. Like a conversation, he said slowly, that I didn't finish. Mara closed her eyes briefly. We have a word for that, she said. Tell me. Longing, she said. It's not grief exactly. It's grief's quieter cousin. The part that stays after the acute loss has passed, the reaching for something that used to be there. Kael was very still. Longing, he said. Yes. I have been carrying that for 4 years without a name for it. I know, she said gently. That's the hardest kind to carry. He looked at his terminal. At the Dorith request. At 60 years of conflict, quietly beginning to move. Mara, he said, and it was the first time in 2 years he had used her first name without the diplomatic prefix. She noticed, didn't comment on it. I want to do something, he said, something that is outside my mandate and possibly outside my framework. Tell me, she said. I want to respond to the Dorith message, he said, personally, not as the Orin Envoy. He paused, as someone who read it and was moved by it. That's not outside your framework, Mara said quietly. It isn't. No, she said. That's conscience becoming action. She almost smiled. That's just what happens next. He wrote the message in 11 minutes. Mara didn't watch him write it. She looked at the wall, at the floor, at the cold cup she still hadn't put down, but she was aware of him composing it beside her. The particular focused stillness of someone doing something that matters being done carefully. When he finished, he held his terminal for a moment without sending it. I've never written anything like this, he said. What did you write? That I read their message? That I found it, he paused, correct. That the grief of an enemy for your children is not a political gesture. That I recognized it as something real and wanted to say so. He looked at the screen. I don't know if that's the right thing. It's the honest thing, Mara said. Those are usually the same. He sent it. They sat in the quiet that followed, the particular quiet after something small and irreversible has been done. The morning briefings, Kael said eventually. Can wait, Mara said. He didn't argue. Another human thing he had been learning from her, that some mornings the work could wait, because a different kind of work was already happening. The children on Carris Moon, he said, you grieved for them immediately, before the news was even an hour old. He looked at her carefully. Did you know something about them? The question landed in a specific way. Mara was quiet for longer than her usual quiet. 6 months ago, she said, I filed a report about environmental processing instability in that system, specifically the atmospheric regulation infrastructure. Kael was very still. I followed up twice, she said. Asterisk, it was reviewed. Noted. Deprioritized. Asterisk, her voice stayed even, professionally even. The evenness of someone who had been keeping something level by force of will all morning. There were other concerns considered more urgent. The transit lounge was completely silent. Mara, he said. I know, she said. I know the chain of decisions. I know my report was one input among many. I know no single person. That's not what I was going to say. She looked at him. I was going to say, Kael said quietly that the conscience you described to me this morning, the awareness of existing inside a web of consequence larger than your intentions, I understand now why it is so heavy for you. She looked away, at the wall, at the particular middle distance of someone holding something together. You've been carrying this since the news arrived, he said. Not just grief. Grief with a question inside it. Whether it would have mattered, she said, if someone had listened, if I had pushed harder, if... Mara. She stopped. You tried, he said. 3 syllables. Completely simple. And somehow, from someone whose framework had no category for any of this 3 hours ago, the most precisely right thing anyone had said to her all morning. She pressed her eyes closed for a moment. When she opened them, her terminal was lit. A response. From the Dorith diplomatic office. Addressed to Envoy Kael, but CC'd specifically and deliberately to Dr. Mara Solis. How do they know my name? She said. Kael looked at the message. Because, he said slowly, they reviewed the Conclave environmental reports from 6 months ago. He looked up at her. They know you filed it. Mara read the message twice. Then she set down her cold cup. Carefully. The way you set something down when your hands need to be empty for what comes next. The Dorith message was short, shorter than she expected for something that had clearly been composed with great care, every word chosen, nothing wasted, the particular economy of beings who understood that precision was its own form of respect. It said, we found the environmental report filed by Dr. Mara Solis, dated 6 months prior. We have read it in full. We want her to know that we read it, that we understand she saw what was coming and tried to make others see it too. We are not writing this to assign responsibility. We are writing this because we believe that the people who try deserve to know that their trying was seen, even when it was not enough. We grieve the children of Carris Moon. We grieve also for the people who worked to prevent what could not be prevented. We ask that Dr. Solis, if she is willing, join the joint recovery delegation. Not as a diplomat, as someone who was already there 6 months ago, trying. The transit lounge was completely still. Kael waited. He had learned this from her, the value of wading through silence rather than filling it. They read it. Mara said, finally, her voice very quiet. 6 months ago, I filed it, and it disappeared into a review queue, and I thought, she stopped. I thought no one ever. She stopped again. Someone saw it. Kael said, someone saw it, she repeated, like testing whether it was real. She pressed her fingers against her eyes for a moment, not hiding, just holding herself together long enough for the thing that had been lodged in her chest all morning to find somewhere to go. When she lowered her hands, her expression had changed. Not healed. Grief wasn't that fast, and she knew it better than anyone, but something had shifted. The specific shift of weight that happens when you have been carrying something alone, and someone reaches over and takes part of it. I'll go, she said. To Carris Moon. I'll go. I know, Kael said. She looked at him, at this alien diplomat who had walked into the lounge 2 hours ago to confirm a briefing schedule and had instead spent the morning learning words his language didn't have. You should come too, she said. He considered it for exactly the length of time it took to confirm what he already knew. Yes, he said. They sat together for a moment longer in the quiet of the transit lounge, the morning briefings unstarted, the cold cup on the floor, 60 years of conflict somewhere in the process of becoming something else. That evening, Kael filed his quarterly cultural observation report to the Diplomatic Commission. In the section reserved for significant behavioral notes, he wrote carefully and at length about what he had witnessed. He wrote about grief that crossed genetic lines and the civilizations it had quietly built, about conscience as the awareness of consequence without intent, about longing as the conversation that outlasts the person it was meant for. In the final paragraph, he wrote, human empathy does not operate within biological boundaries. It extends to strangers, to enemies, to children not their own, to losses they did not cause and could not prevent. This is not, as I previously understood it, a malfunction of their grief response. It is the mechanism by which they remain connected to one another across every distance that should, by any rational framework, disconnect them. This morning I watched a human grieve for 41 children she had never met. By the end of the morning, that grief had moved 60 years of conflict and brought 2 species to the same moon to rebuild together. I have revised my previous assessment of human empathy as a cultural anomaly. It is, I now believe, the most sophisticated diplomatic technology in the known conclave. They were born with it. They don't always use it well, but when they do. He paused, looked for the right ending, wrote simply, when they do, things that seemed permanent turn out not to be.